Every day, humans imagine better versions of their lives. They picture living in another city, working a dream job, being loved by someone new, publishing a book, starting over. And yet, most of these imagined lives remain just that, imaginary. They are lived behind closed eyes, on late-night walks, in moments of boredom or pain. Humans fantasize about lives they secretly know they'll never pursue, not because they can't, but because something in them chooses not to. This video explores the psychology of unchased dreams. Why do people become emotionally attached to lives they never plan to live? What purpose do these fantasies serve? And what does it reveal about the way humans experience freedom, fear, identity, and meaning? Let us begin. 1. The psychological function of fantasy. Fantasies are not random. They are emotional data. When humans imagine a different life, it is often a subconscious way to explore unmet needs. The fantasy is less about the specifics and more about what those specifics represent. A person who dreams of becoming a writer may crave significance, impact, or the freedom of expression. Someone who imagines moving to a coastal city might not care about the beach, but about escape, solitude, or reinvention. Psychologists call this symbolic fulfillment. The idea that imagined scenarios provide emotional satisfaction without requiring real-world change. In this way, fantasy becomes a form of mental self-soothing, a coping mechanism for dissatisfaction, stagnation, or emotional emptiness. Like a pressure valve, it allows people to release desire without disrupting their existing reality. But over time, these fantasies become emotionally addictive. The mind returns to them for comfort, for stimulation, for the feeling of momentum that doesn't actually require motion. They become a private sanctuary and a quiet trap. 2. Deferred identity and the myth of future you. Humans often split their identity into two versions: the self they are now, and the ideal self they'll become later. This imagined future self is more disciplined, more courageous, more free. They start the business, leave the relationship, move abroad, speak up, take risks, and they always exist in the future. This psychological pattern is called temporal self-displacement. It creates a buffer between present discomfort and future possibility. It allows people to avoid confronting the fear, discomfort, or sacrifice required today, because the better version of themselves will handle it tomorrow. But tomorrow rarely comes, because the fantasy relies on delay to survive. If it were pursued, it would face friction, rejection, or failure. So it remains locked in a dream state, perfect because it's never tested. This leads to identity paralysis. People begin to identify more with their fantasy self than their real self. They say things like, "I could be great if I wanted to," or "one day I'll write that book." Their confidence is rooted in imagined potential, not lived experience. Over time, this divide grows, and the life they fantasize about becomes a mirror of what they never became. 3. Fear as the hidden gatekeeper. Fear is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers, "You're not ready," or "What if you fail?" Or worse, "What if you succeed and still feel empty?" Behind most unchased dreams is a fear that the fantasy will not survive reality, that taking action will expose the dream as fragile, flawed, or unreachable. This fear often leads to preemptive failure, giving up before beginning. It's easier to mourn a dream that never started than to live through one that crashes halfway. There's also the fear of judgment. Changing paths often requires disappointing others, family, friends, partners. Humans are deeply social. Even imagined rejection can paralyze them into staying still. Additionally, chasing a dream means leaving the known world, the comfort of routine, the safety of predictability. Many would rather fantasize about freedom than risk the vertigo of actual liberation. So fear becomes the gatekeeper, polite, patient, and always convincing. And behind that gate sits a version of life that will never be lived. 4. Social programming and the illusion of choice. From childhood, humans are programmed to prioritize safety, approval, and conformity. They are told what success looks like, which dreams are realistic, which behaviors are rewarded, which ambitions are too much. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, a condition in which individuals believe they cannot change their circumstances even when they can. So when a human fantasizes about a wildly different life, it often exists outside of their programmed parameters. A musician stuck in accounting, a traveler locked into suburbia, a free spirit buried under social expectation. They don't chase that life because a deeper voice says, that kind of freedom isn't for people like you. And because this voice was often implanted early, by family, culture, or education, it sounds like truth, but it is only a narrative, a downloaded script, one that can be rewritten, but rarely is. The result is a population of people living culturally approved lives while privately craving something that feels more real. 5. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. The human brain is a prediction machine. It values certainty over quality, which means it will often choose a painful but familiar reality over a joyful but uncertain one. This explains why people stay in unfulfilling jobs, stagnant relationships, or cities they secretly resent. It also explains why they fantasize about something different but never move. To the brain, the known equals survival. Even if it is miserable, unfamiliar paths, even hopeful ones, trigger the brain's threat response. Change equals risk. Risk equals danger. So it responds with anxiety, procrastination, or self-sabotage. Real freedom requires uncertainty, and uncertainty feels like death to a brain trained for safety. So instead of walking through the unknown, people create elaborate internal lives filled with what-ifs. Fantasies become emotional anesthesia, a way to feel alive without threatening stability. The brain is not designed for happiness. It is designed for efficiency and survival. And dreams, unfortunately, are inefficient. 6. Emotional substitution and the fantasy feedback loop. The more a person fantasizes, the more emotional reward the brain receives. Dopamine, imagination, escapism, all without real-world effort. This creates a feedback loop. 1. Reality feels boring or painful. 2. The mind escapes into fantasy. 3. Fantasy provides emotional relief. 4. Reality remains unchanged. 5. The mind escapes again. Over time, this loop becomes addictive. For example, a person dreaming of becoming a filmmaker may spend hours imagining scenes, award speeches, or writing credits, but never picks up a camera. Why? Because the emotional payoff of the fantasy is safer than the work, rejection, and imperfection of actual creation. Fantasy becomes a form of emotional substitution, a surrogate life that mimics progress, intimacy, and adventure, without requiring any of it. This is not laziness. It's an unintentional adaptation. The fantasy becomes better than the pursuit because it is painless, but painless is not the same as fulfilling. 7. The grief of the unlived life. Eventually, the gap between fantasy and reality becomes a source of grief. Psychologists call this the unlived life. The quiet sadness of all the versions of you that never emerged. The artist you buried, the country you never moved to, the career you didn't chase, the person you didn't become. This grief is subtle. It shows up in moments of jealousy, in dreams that make you wake up sad, in the nostalgia for a life that never happened. It is the emotional consequence of long-term inaction, of loving a dream so much you protected it from the risk of becoming real. Humans don't just mourn what they lose. They mourn what they never gave themselves permission to try. And the tragedy of fantasy is that it can feel so vivid, so emotional, so true, that it tricks the brain into believing it was lived. But it wasn't. Imagining isn't living. Fantasies are not failures. They are blueprints, emotional signals, clues about what matters most to a person. But without action, they become emotional artifacts, beautiful, untouchable, and slowly suffocating. To imagine a life is to touch potential. To live that life is to endure uncertainty, sacrifice, and discomfort. Most humans choose the former, not because they lack ambition, but because they never learned how to handle discomfort in service of something greater. But if fantasy is the mind's blueprint for freedom, then discomfort is the currency of change. Those who learn to tolerate it, even briefly, are the ones who convert imagination into reality. The others? They will always wonder what would have happened. And in that wondering, they will live the ghost of a life they never met.